I never meant to catch them. Honestly, I just needed to grab some stuff from the garage. Nothing too dramatic. My mind was preoccupied with work and the usual errands. I hadn't planned on anything unusual happening. But as I pulled into the driveway of my parents' house, something in the back of my mind started nagging at me. It wasn't anything specific, just this uneasy feeling, like when you forget something important but can't figure out what it is. It wasn't like I didn't visit my parents often. I was there every other weekend or so to help with things around the house, or sometimes just to hang out with them. But today I didn't expect anything out of the ordinary. The garage was cluttered with boxes I had been meaning to go through, and I thought it would be a quick stop. A few minutes of loading things into my car and I'd be on my way again. The driveway was empty except for my parents' car, so I assumed they were inside. I grabbed the keys to the garage, heading for the back door. I wasn't thinking about anything specific, just the usual mundane stuff. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, the faint smell of wood and old tools filling the air. But before I could even get to the boxes, I noticed something odd. It was just a glance, really, but something about the way the curtains were drawn in the living room caught my attention. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe my parents had just closed them for some reason. But as I moved around the garage, grabbing a few boxes to load into my car, I kept finding myself glancing back at that window. It's like I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. That's when I saw them. My wife, Sarah. She was walking out of the side door of the house, glancing over her shoulder like she was making sure no one saw her. She looked nervous, fidgeting with the hem of her jacket, almost like she was trying to sneak away. At first, I thought maybe she was just leaving for something. Maybe she had an appointment or something that I didn't know about. But then I saw who was following her. Jake, my brother. They didn't notice me, but I saw them clearly. My wife and my brother sneaking out together. The two of them walking quickly across the yard, looking around as if they were trying to avoid being seen. My heart slammed against my chest as the truth hit me like a punch in the gut. I couldn't move, frozen in place. My hands went cold, and my mind raced, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. It didn't make any sense. Sarah and Jake, my wife and my brother, the idea didn't even compute at first. I had to be imagining things. But there they were, so close to the door, like they were leaving the house together. I had to be seeing things wrong, right? But no, the more I stared, the clearer it became. Jake had his arm around her waist for a second, like he was guiding her out, and they shared a look, something intimate, something I shouldn't have been witnessing. It hit me like a ton of bricks. They weren't just talking. They weren't just friends or even family. No, they were doing something behind my back, something I couldn't ignore. I didn't want to believe it, but every part of my gut screamed that this was exactly what I thought it was. I wanted to run to them, to confront them, to scream. I wanted to storm in and demand an explanation, to throw their lies in their faces and watch as their world fell apart. But I couldn't move. I just stood there, staring at them from the garage, the overwhelming sense of betrayal washing over me like a wave I couldn't escape. My mind was spinning, trying to catch up with what I had just seen. My thoughts were tangled in confusion and disbelief. How long had this been going on? I tried to steady myself, to take a breath, but it felt like the air had been sucked out of my lungs. It wasn't just the act itself that was so crushing, it was the sheer audacity of it. Sarah, the woman I loved, my wife, sneaking around behind my back with my brother of all people. The very people I trusted most in the world. I couldn't even wrap my head around it. Part of me wanted to march right up to the door and confront them, to demand answers. But another part of me, one that was trying desperately to hold on to some semblance of control, told me to wait. Maybe I was jumping to conclusions. Maybe there was some explanation. Maybe they weren't doing what I thought they were doing. I needed to think this through. I didn't know how long I stood there, motionless, just staring at them. They moved quickly, disappearing around the corner of the house. I felt a sickening twist in my stomach, like I had been punched in the gut. The pain was raw and real, like nothing I had ever experienced before. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was physical. I had to force myself to move, to stop staring at the place where they had just been. It felt like the world had shifted on its axis. How could they do this to me? How could Sarah, the woman I trusted with everything, betray me like this? How could Jake, my own brother, be involved in something so destructive? I walked back to my car, my mind racing. But even though I was moving, it didn't feel like I was fully in control of myself. It felt like I was on autopilot, just going through the motions while my brain tried to make sense of everything. I was still so numb, so stunned by the reality of what I had just witnessed. I didn't want to believe it, but I couldn't ignore what was right in front of me. As I got into my car and started the engine, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew I couldn't just let this slide. What had just happened couldn't be undone. And whatever came next, I was going to have to face it head on, no matter how much it hurt. That was the moment when everything began to unravel. It was the moment that started the path toward everything I was about to lose. But it was also the moment when I decided I wasn't going to let them get away with it. They had no idea what they had just set in motion. I couldn't just stand there in my car paralyzed by what I had just seen. The sickening images of Sarah and Jake sneaking out together played over and over in my mind like a broken record. I wasn't sure what to do next. I was too furious to think clearly, but I knew I needed answers. I couldn't just walk away and pretend I hadn't seen what I had. I needed to confront someone, anyone. I thought about calling Sarah, but I already knew that would just lead to lies and excuses. So instead, I headed into my parents' house, needing to find some sort of clarity, some explanation, some reason why this was happening. As I entered, the familiar scent of coffee and old furniture hit me. It should have been comforting, but today it felt suffocating. I could hear my mom in the kitchen humming to herself as she prepared lunch. I almost wanted to turn around and leave, but I couldn't. I had to know. I had to ask her if she knew anything about what I had just witnessed, if she had any idea what was really going on. I stepped into the kitchen, trying to keep my emotions in check. My mom didn't seem to notice anything off about my demeanor. She greeted me with a warm smile, oblivious to the storm that was brewing inside me. "Hey honey, how's everything going?" she asked as she stirred a pot on the stove. I could feel my blood pressure rise at the sound of her voice, knowing what I was about to confront her with, but I needed to know what was happening. "I need to talk to you," I said, my voice coming out much sharper than I intended. She looked up from her cooking, surprised at the tension in my tone. "Of course, what's wrong?" she asked, setting the spoon down and wiping her hands on a towel. I was torn between blurting out everything I had seen and somehow keeping my cool enough to get to the bottom of what was going on. I didn't know why I thought it would help, but I figured I had to start somewhere. So I swallowed hard and said, "It's about Sarah and Jake." The way my mom's face shifted made my stomach drop. There was something in her expression, a strange mixture of pity and knowing that made my pulse quicken. Her lips parted like she was about to speak, but she didn't say anything immediately. She just studied me for a long moment, almost like she was assessing my reaction. I wanted to shout, to demand answers, but I held myself together. "I saw them," I said finally, feeling the words come out of me like I had no control over them. "Sarah and Jake. They were sneaking around outside, acting like they were hiding something. It didn't look right, Mom. It didn't feel right." Her eyes narrowed slightly, and she sighed, her shoulders sagging as though a weight had just settled onto them. Then, without looking at me, she said something I never expected to hear. "I've known for a while now." My chest constricted, and for a moment I didn't know if I was going to be able to breathe. I had hoped, no, prayed that my suspicions were wrong. But hearing my mom admit that she knew, that she had been aware of it for longer than I could even imagine, was a gut punch I wasn't ready for. What I managed to choke out, the word feeling foreign in my mouth. "How long? How could you not tell me?" She didn't meet my gaze, her eyes focusing instead on the simmering pot in front of her. "I didn't know how to tell you. And honestly, I didn't want to be the one to break that kind of news." I wanted to scream. I wanted to shout at her, to demand why she didn't warn me, why she didn't say something sooner. But I stayed quiet, the anger building inside me like an unstoppable force. The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. "Mom, how could you let them do this to me?" I finally asked, my voice cracking as the floodgates opened. "How could you just let this happen?" She looked at me then, her eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place, guilt maybe, or just resignation. She didn't apologize. Instead, she said something that made my heart drop even further. "Dear," she began, her tone calm but weighted with an unsettling truth. "I understand. I understand how difficult it must be for you, having to deal with Jake's weight. It's a lot to bear, especially for a woman like you. You don't have to justify your affair with him. I'll keep it a secret." The words hit me like a slap in the face. My brain couldn't make sense of what she had just said. Affair with Jake, my brother, the thought itself was absurd, yet here she was, calmly offering her acceptance like it was a simple fact of life. For a moment, I was speechless. I couldn't process the reality of her words, the weight of the betrayal from both her and Jake. The pain of what she had just admitted was overwhelming. She wasn't upset, she wasn't disgusted, no, she was actually making excuses for them, even offering her approval. "Mom," what I barely managed to say, my voice hoarse with disbelief. Jake's name hung in the air like a dark cloud, suffocating me as I tried to comprehend what was happening. The betrayal wasn't just from Sarah anymore. It was from my mother, too. How could she say something like that? How could she excuse this? Before I could process her words any further, Jake's voice drifted into the kitchen. He walked in like it was just another ordinary day, like everything was fine. "Thank you, Mom," he said, his tone too casual, almost smug. "We love you." The way he said it so matter-of-fact, as if nothing was wrong, made my blood run cold. I could feel the walls closing in, suffocating me with the weight of everything that was unraveling before me. This wasn't just an affair, it was a complete breakdown of everything I thought I knew. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to get out of there. The room was spinning, my vision blurring as everything crumbled around me. It felt like I was drowning in a sea of betrayal, with no way out. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor as I turned toward the door. I didn't know what I was going to do or how I was going to handle this, but I couldn't stay there any longer. "I can't do this," I muttered, barely recognizing the words coming out of my own mouth. "I need to go." My mom didn't stop me. Neither did Jake. They just watched me leave, their silence louder than anything they could have said. I don't know how long I sat in my car after I left the house, but it felt like hours. The engine was running, but I wasn't going anywhere. I was just staring out through the windshield, trying to make sense of everything. The images of Sarah and Jake, the way they looked at each other, the way they moved like they were trying to keep a secret, kept flashing in my mind, over and over again. My thoughts were a whirlwind, spiraling out of control, bouncing between rage, confusion, and pain. The betrayal wasn't just in what I had seen, it was in how everything had been so carefully hidden from me. They had planned this, they had done this behind my back, and I hadn't noticed a single thing. It was like the world had been a lie, and I was only now realizing it. I could feel the anger building up inside me, the heat rising in my chest, making my hands shake. I had trusted Sarah, loved her with everything I had, and she had thrown that away for my brother. My own brother. How could they do this to me, to our relationship, to everything we had built? The questions came faster than I could answer them, and each one hit me harder than the last. I could almost feel my blood boiling as the frustration and betrayal turned into pure, unfiltered rage. But what good would it do to sit here and just let it eat me alive? What could I do? What should I do? I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, trying to keep myself from losing control. It was hard to focus on anything other than the pain. My thoughts felt jumbled, like I was drowning in a sea of emotions I couldn't process. I wanted to hurt them. I wanted to make them feel the same agony I was feeling. But what would that solve? I couldn't just lash out in the heat of the moment. I needed to be smart. I needed to plan this. I had to be calm, calculated. But even as I told myself that, it felt like a hollow thing to say. How could I be calm when everything inside me was screaming in pain? How could I hold it together when my entire world had just been turned upside down? I took a deep breath and forced myself to think. If I just let my emotions guide me, I would do something I'd regret. I couldn't act impulsively. I needed to make them understand what they had done to me, and I needed to do it in a way that would stick. I couldn't let them get away with it, not after everything they had taken from me. I wasn't going to be some guy who just takes it. I wasn't going to stand by and let my life get torn apart by the people I trusted most. No, I needed revenge, but it wasn't going to be the kind of revenge that just made me feel better in the moment. It needed to be strategic. It needed to make them feel the weight of what they had done. I sat there for a long time, the sound of the engine running in the background, the silence only broken by the occasional passing car. It wasn't that I was planning my next move, I was just giving myself time to breathe, time to process, time to make sense of everything that had happened. It was almost as if I could hear their voices in my head mocking me. "Thank you, Mom. We love you," Jake's words echoed, each one like a slap in the face. How could he say that so casually? How could they both act like they hadn't just shattered my life into pieces? I gritted my teeth, the anger surging through me again, hotter this time. But then, just as quickly, a cold, calculated thought crept into my mind. Maybe they thought they could just get away with this. Maybe they thought I would just forgive and forget. But I wasn't that kind of person. I wasn't going to let them walk away unscathed. No, they needed to pay. My mind started to work, the anger starting to give way to something far more dangerous, a plan. I wasn't going to be reckless. I wasn't going to lash out in anger and make a mistake I'd regret. I was going to be smart. I was going to make them feel what I felt, but I would do it in a way that would leave them scrambling for the rest of their lives. I wasn't sure what that meant yet, but I knew one thing: the power was in my hands now. I was in control. I could make them regret every choice they had made, every lie they had told me. I just needed to figure out how to do it. I could feel the rage still simmering beneath the surface, but I focused on the calm, the cold determination that had begun to settle in. This wasn't about getting revenge in a moment of fury. This was about making them understand the gravity of their betrayal. It wasn't just about hurting them, it was about making them regret ever crossing me. I pulled out of the driveway and started driving, not knowing where I was going or what I was going to do, but knowing that I had to start planning. I didn't want to act too quickly, but I couldn't just let them live their lives like nothing had happened. There was no way I was going to let this slide. They had crossed a line, and now they were going to feel the consequences. As I drove, I thought about everything I could do, how I could make them feel the sting of what they had done. My mind was racing, trying to figure out every possible angle. It wasn't enough to just make them suffer. I wanted them to feel everything I was feeling. Every ounce of the pain, the betrayal, the anger. They needed to understand that this wasn't something they could just walk away from. Every time I thought I had the perfect plan, another thought would come to mind, another detail I hadn't considered. But the more I thought about it, the more it became clear this had to be perfect. Every move had to be calculated, every step deliberate. I wasn't just doing this to make myself feel better, I was doing it to show them that I was done being the victim. This wasn't going to be a one-time thing. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about showing them that when you betray someone, there are always consequences. And so I began to plan. I wasn't sure how it would unfold or what the final outcome would be, but I knew one thing: they were going to regret everything. They had no idea what they had just set in motion. The days after I left my parents' house felt like they stretched into eternity. It was hard to focus on anything. My thoughts kept returning to what I had witnessed: Sarah and Jake sneaking around like they were the only two people who mattered in the world. My brother. The woman I had married. They had torn everything I knew apart in one quick, thoughtless moment. I couldn't get the image of them together out of my mind. It replayed over and over, no matter how much I tried to shut it out. But now I wasn't just angry. I wasn't just heartbroken. I was determined. There was a fire inside me, a need to make them both feel the full weight of their betrayal. I had already started planning my revenge, piecing together the steps, figuring out how I could make them pay for what they had done. I needed them to regret everything. I needed them to feel as powerless as I felt in that moment. The hardest part was the waiting. I didn't want to rush into anything and make a mistake, but every minute that passed felt like an eternity. I had to be careful. This wasn't something I could do half-heartedly. This needed to be done right, to be devastating, to leave a lasting impact. I spent days thinking about it, considering every angle, looking for the one thing that would shake them to their core. I knew I couldn't just confront them directly. That would be too easy. No, I needed to do something that would make them question everything they thought they knew about their lives. Something that would make them question whether they could ever trust each other again. I didn't want them to have any peace. I wanted them to suffer the same way I was suffering, if not more. It didn't take long to figure out the first step. I had to gather information. I had to know everything about their affair, how long it had been going on, how serious it was. I needed to know the details, because those would be the pieces that made my revenge so much more effective. I couldn't go in blind, not when there was so much at stake. I started with Sarah. I didn't reach out to her, of course, no, I couldn't let her know I was onto her. But I began to notice the little things she had done that I had overlooked before. The extra hours she was spending away from home, the late-night texts she would quickly delete, the way she was always glued to her phone, acting like she had something to hide. It was all so painfully obvious now. But I couldn't let her know I was watching. I had to keep my distance, play it cool. Jake, on the other hand, was easier. He was more careless, more obvious. I could see him slipping up more and more, making little mistakes that would later come back to haunt him. I'd catch him looking at his phone in a way that screamed guilt, or overhear snippets of conversations that didn't make any sense. He thought he was being clever, but he wasn't nearly as good at hiding it as he thought. Every time I saw him, I could feel the anger bubbling inside me, but I kept my cool. I had to stay focused. I started following them, watching them from a distance. I had to be careful. I couldn't let them know I was onto them. But every time I saw them together, every time I saw how they moved and interacted, my anger flared again. I wanted to march up to them and scream at them to stop lying, stop betraying me, stop ruining everything. But I knew that wouldn't get me anywhere. No, I had to be patient. I had to let them dig their own grave. I needed to give them enough rope to hang themselves, and then I would pull it tight. Every move they made, every careless slip-up, would be another nail in their coffin. The more I watched, the more I realized how much they thought they had covered their tracks. They really believed they were getting away with it. They thought I would never find out. But they were wrong. I was going to make sure they knew exactly how much I knew, and I was going to make them understand the depth of their betrayal. I started setting my plan into motion. Little things at first, subtle actions that would seem like coincidences to them but would chip away at their peace of mind. I sent anonymous tips to people they both knew, dropping small hints about what was going on. I made sure the information was just damning enough to get them second-guessing, but not enough to expose the whole truth. I wanted them to live in uncertainty, to wonder who knew what and how much was out there. It was working. I could see the cracks forming in their confidence. They started getting paranoid, looking over their shoulders, wondering if anyone was onto them. The guilt was eating away at them, and I could feel a sick satisfaction in watching it unfold. But I couldn't stop there. I needed more. I needed to make sure they would never forget what they had done to me. So I took it a step further. I dug into their pasts, their relationships, their histories. I found old emails, texts, social media posts, anything I could use to dig the knife in deeper. The more I uncovered, the more I realized how much they had been hiding from me. The lies, the deceit, the manipulations, it was all right there, just waiting to be exposed. I wasn't doing this out of spite, at least not entirely. I was doing this because I needed them to understand the consequences of their actions. I needed them to know that betraying someone isn't just about breaking hearts, it's about breaking trust, breaking everything that holds a relationship together. And I was going to make them see that. The days turned into weeks, and the tension between them grew. Sarah started acting distant, almost like she was waiting for something to happen. Jake became more defensive, more guarded. I could see it in their eyes. They knew something was coming, but they didn't know when or how. And that uncertainty, knowing that they were on the edge, waiting for the truth to come crashing down, was exactly what I wanted. I knew I had them. It was only a matter of time before everything came to light. They would have to face the consequences of their actions. They wouldn't be able to hide from it anymore. And when that moment came, when they realized that I had been the one orchestrating their downfall all along, I wanted to make sure they knew that there was no escape. I wasn't doing this to feel better, to get some petty sense of revenge. No, I was doing this because they needed to understand that betrayal isn't something that just happens in a moment of weakness. It's a choice, a decision, and they made it. And now they would have to live with the fallout. I wasn't done yet. I had more to uncover, more to expose. And when the time was right, I would strike. I had already set everything in motion, and there was no turning back now. They thought they had gotten away with it, but they hadn't. They had no idea what was coming for them. It felt like the calm before the storm. Everything had built up to this point, and the weight of what was coming loomed over me like a dark cloud. I had been patient, I had been careful, but now the moment had finally arrived. The culmination of weeks of planning, of gathering information, of watching them squirm without them even knowing. The time for subtlety was over. It was time for the truth to come crashing down on them. I had already put everything in place. The pieces were scattered, but they were in the right spots, waiting to fall into place at the perfect moment. Sarah and Jake thought they had been getting away with their affair, that they had been careful, that no one would find out. But they had underestimated me. They hadn't considered the consequences of their actions, and now they were about to. I spent the night before everything went down in a strange state of calm. The anger, the hurt, the rage, it was all still there, swirling beneath the surface, but I was oddly detached. It was like I was watching someone else's life unfold, like I was a spectator in my own story. Maybe that's how I had to be to get through this, to keep the emotions at bay, to stay in control. This wasn't about me anymore. It was about making them realize the magnitude of what they had done. The next day, I set the plan in motion. It started with a simple message, a text I sent to Sarah, a vague, anonymous message that would plant the seed of doubt in her mind. It wasn't anything too specific, just enough to make her wonder if anyone else knew what was going on. I didn't want her to panic, but I needed her to question everything. The more uncertain she felt, the better. The more she second-guessed every interaction, every look, the more power I had. I knew she would panic. She would try to cover her tracks, to act normal, but I could already see the cracks starting to form. She wasn't as good at hiding things as she thought. I could see it in the way she looked at her phone, the way she flinched when she heard her own name. She wasn't prepared for this, not like Jake. He was more methodical, more careful, but even he had started slipping up. I could see it in the way he fidgeted when I was around, the way he kept looking over his shoulder, as though he could feel the weight of the secret pressing down on him. The next phase was setting up the confrontation. I had been planning this for days, but now it was time to make my move. I called in a favor from a mutual friend, someone who could help me get the evidence I needed. It wasn't hard to track them down. They were always together, always sneaking around, always in their own little world. It didn't take long for me to find the perfect opportunity. I set up a meeting, a casual get-together, but this time, everything would be different. The night of the meeting, I could feel the tension in the air. I wasn't sure if Sarah knew something was off, but she was acting more distant than usual. Jake was on edge, constantly checking his phone like he was waiting for something to happen. I could see the nervous energy between them, the way they both kept glancing at each other, wondering who knew what. It was almost pathetic to watch them try so hard to maintain the illusion of normalcy. I waited until the right moment, until the atmosphere was just perfect. And then I dropped the bombshell. I didn't need to yell, didn't need to get emotional. All I needed was the truth, the cold, undeniable truth. I didn't care how they reacted. I didn't care if they were surprised, shocked, or angry. This was my moment, the moment when everything they thought they knew would come crashing down. I started with Jake. I laid it out, piece by piece, every little thing I had uncovered about him, his lies, his deception, the way he had betrayed me. I watched the color drain from his face as the truth hit him. He looked like he wanted to say something, to defend himself, but there was nothing he could say. I had it all, and there was no way out for him. Then I turned to Sarah. I didn't have to say much. I could see the guilt written all over her face, the way she couldn't look me in the eye. She tried to act surprised, tried to play it off like she hadn't known I knew, but I could see right through her. She was just as guilty as Jake, and now she had to face the consequences. They both sat there, stunned into silence, their faces a mixture of shock, fear, and disbelief. I had always imagined this moment, how they would react, how they would beg for forgiveness, how they would try to justify their actions. But none of that happened. They didn't beg. They didn't try to explain. They just sat there looking like they had been caught in the act because they had. It was in that moment that I realized how little they actually cared about me. They didn't feel sorry for what they had done. They didn't feel guilty. They just felt sorry for themselves. It was like they were the victims in all of this. They didn't even have the decency to apologize. They didn't even have the decency to admit what they had done. Instead, they sat there looking like deer caught in the headlights, waiting for the storm to pass. I didn't need an apology. I didn't need them to feel sorry for me. I didn't care about their remorse. This wasn't about forgiveness. This wasn't about moving on. This was about them paying the price for what they had done to me. And as they sat there frozen, I could feel the satisfaction building inside me. The rage, the pain, the hurt, it was all still there, but now it was secondary. I was in control. I had taken back my power. They had thought they could get away with this, thought they could lie to me and betray me without facing any consequences. But I had shown them the truth, and now they had to live with it. The silence between us stretched on for what felt like an eternity, each second heavier than the last. I wasn't sure what would happen next, whether they would try to apologize, try to justify their actions, or just walk away. But in that moment, I didn't care. I had already won. The revenge I had planned wasn't about hurting them physically, about seeking some sort of violent retribution. It was about making them realize the magnitude of their betrayal. It was about stripping away the illusion they had built, tearing down the walls they had put up, and forcing them to face the truth of what they had done. And in the end, that was enough.